Namaskaram to all. Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Pada Shankaram Loka Shankaram. Today, I'll be speaking on the topic Shankara and Yoga. We all know that Adi Shankara Bhagavat Pada, whom we fondly refer to as Acharya, was the foremost proponent of the Advaita Vedanta Siddhanta. So when you look at the Darshanas, the Shat Darshanas, the 6 schools of philosophy, the orthodox schools of philosophy, Astika Darshanas, you see that Sankhya, Yoga, Mimamsa, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, all of this appear before, and Vedanta Darshana appears later. And in many cases, it would seem that the Vedanta Darshana is trying to refute the other Darshanas and establish its Siddhanta. That is why in many of the Vedanta Shastras, you would see the Vedanta Darshana taking the others as the Purva Paksha and themselves establishing the Siddhanta Paksha. So it might be a bit of wonder to people to say that naturally, if I'm going to say Shankara and Yoga, it means that Shankara must have been opposed to Yoga as a Darshana, because Yoga Darshana comes along with Sankhya. So Vedanta Darshana is opposed to Sankhya and Yoga because they take Sankhya as the Pradhana Malla or the Purva Paksha in many of the sutras and many of the discussions in Vedanta. So definitely they must be refuting. But it is not that easy. There is a nuance to this whole aspect. And that is exactly why I thought of bringing this topic to the best of my ability to share with all of you. So before we commence on this discussion, we must clearly understand the difference between yoga as a shastra and yoga as a darshana. The yoga as a shastra or a science definitely has the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali Maharshi as the basis. The moment you call yoga as a darshana, there are various other aspects that get associated with that school of philosophy, the system of philosophy. Now, for those who have analyzed the Yoga Sutras or the Yoga Shastra in detail, will understand that the Yoga Sutra begins itself by defining yoga as yogas chitta vritti nirodha. Yoga is the cessation of all the modifications of the mind stuff. Tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. What is the use of stopping all those cessations or modifications of that mind stuff? What is the use of all that? Is to get established in the true self. Tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. That is the ultimate objective. Now, when you just take that as an objective, you will know that Vedanta is also speaking about establishing yourself in the true nature of the self or Brahman. So, at that point of time, it might appear that there seems to be very less difference between Vedanta Shastra and Yoga Shastra. The entire Yoga Sutras are about the journey inwards, right from the time of the first sutra onwards till the last. Patanjali Maharshi gives a detail on how to go deeper and deeper inwards and achieve that tada drashtuhu swarupe avasthanam. How to achieve that is the entire focus of the Yoga Sutra. It's an inward journey. Vedanta Shastra is also an inward journey. It speaks about knowing your true nature of the self and establishing yourself in that. So in that aspect, both of them they run extremely close to each other. But the moment it comes as a darshana, Yoga Shastra borrows concepts from the Sankhya Darshana. That is why it is called as Seshwara Sankhya. It is an allied school of philosophy with yoga. with Sankhya, and both of them go hand in hand, because the worldview which a Darshana Shastra or a school of philosophy needs to present, aspects about the Jagat, aspects about Ishvara, the relationship, and all of these aspects is not something that Yoga Shastra deep dives into or discusses. So these aspects are borrowed from Sankhya, and that is how the Yoga Darshana gets built. So the core of the Yoga Shastra, being the Yoga Sutras, speak about the inner journey or the inward journey, while the rest of the aspects are taken from Sankhya. That is what forms Yoga Darshana. So once we understand the difference between the Yoga Shastra and the Yoga Darshana, now it will be clear of how Shankara actually approaches this entire aspect or this entire topic. And this has been in a very detailed manner discussed in the Brahma Sutra, which says, Etena Yogaha Pratyuktaha. This is called the Yoga Pratyukta Adhikaranam. So in this Adhikaranam, he very clearly states that by all the arguments that are being made to refute the Sankhya philosophy or the Sankhya Darshana, the Yoga Darshana is also refuted. Because of this reason that I told you, it is being refuted already. But he makes an exception there. He says he cannot refute entire of yoga. He is refuting only that aspect of yoga which is related with the Sankhya Darshana. Those aspects has been refuted by also refuting Sankhya philosophy. But there are aspects of yoga which is related with the Yoga Shastra, which are very much essential for Vedanta Shastra as well, because they also find mention in the Upanishads. And this is where Acharya says, in the beginning he says, Etena Sankhya Smriti Pratyakyanena Yoga Smritihi api Pratyakhyata Drashtavya Etat iti Dishati. It is very clearly seen that both are refuted as a Darshana. However, Ataha Sampratipannartaika Deshatvat Ashtakadi Smritivat Yoga Smritihi api Anapavadaniya Bhavishyati iti. Anapavadaniya, you cannot refute certain aspects of the yoga which is related with the Yoga Shastra, which is related with the Yoga Smriti, which is related with various aspects like the Ashtanga Yoga, etc. Acharya says. So this clearly says the acceptance of Acharya and the Vedanta Parampara of the Yoga Shastra or the Yoga Sutras. And this is the aspect that I'm going to be speaking about more as I'm going to be delving on this topic of Shankara and Yoga. And from the life of the Acharya also, there are various aspects that can be drawn, which very clearly indicate how adept and expert the Acharya was in the Yoga Shastra and what an expert yogi he was in practice. So these are some of the aspects that we shall delineate now. First, let us look at the works of the Acharya. Beyond the references that I just gave you from the Brahma Sutra Bhashya, there are various places where the Acharya quotes the Patanjala Sutras, the Yoga Sutras. At one place, the Panchavrittis, the Panchavrittayaha, that Patanjali Maharshi speaks about. He says Yogas Chitta Vritti Nirodhaha. Then he goes on to explain what are these vrittis, and he says they are of 5 types. There are 5 modifications, and he goes on to explain them in detail in the Yoga Sutras. Acharya refers to this in his Brahma Sutra Bhashya when he says, Yoga Shastra Prasiddha Manasaha Panchavrittayaha Harigrihyante Pramana Viparyaya Vikalpa Nidra Smritayaha Nama. So he quotes this in his Brahma Sutra Bhashya in the 2nd pada. He speaks about the aspect that the yogis have the power to take up various bodies, various shariras through the power of yoga. He says, Esha evacha yoga shastreshu yoginam aneka sharira yoga prakriya. Aneka sharira yoga prakriya. They are able to take many bodies because of their expertise and their deep understanding of the Yoga Shastra. He speaks about, or he refers to the asanas mentioned in the Yoga Sutra, where he says, Atayeva Padmakadinam asana vishesha Visheshanam Upadeshaha Yoga Shastre. In his Brahma Sutra Bhashya itself, all these comes. He speaks about the asanas, he speaks about the power of the yogi to take different bodies, he speaks about the panchavrittis of the mind. All the various aspects of the Yoga Sutras are referenced or quoted by the Acharya in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya. He also speaks about the reference to the Sushumna Nadi, above the Hridayas. All these nuanced details are given right in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya itself by the Acharya. Now, this is what we find in the Brahma Sutra Bhashyas. Of course, there are references of yoga itself in the Bhagavad Gita, and Acharya explains that with reference to the context in the Bhagavad Gita Bhashya and also in the Upanishad Bhashyas. Because in the Upanishads also there are references to yoga that keeps coming. So he references all of those at those specific instances. The reason I quoted these references is to say that direct references are drawn from the Yoga Shastra or the Yoga Sutras itself by the Acharya, which means the high esteem he keeps for the Yoga Sutras in the entire scheme of things. Now there is another important work that the Acharya has composed on the yoga, which is called as Yoga Taravali. This is only one work that we find that is attributed to the Acharya, which is on the Yoga Shastra, on yoga as a Shastra. It may not be considered as an entire treatise, but it is a composition, it's a work. Now, the importance of this Yoga Taravali comes in the background that if you look at the backdrop of the fact that if you look at Hatha Yoga, now when you look at Yoga Sutras, now what we discussed till now are Yoga Sutras, Yoga Shastra. Yoga Shastra, as I said, the objective is very different, right? It is Tada Drashtuhu Surupe Avasthanam, getting to your true self. In all those different methods of getting to the true self, Ashtanga Yoga is one method. In that Ashtanga Yoga, that is the 8 steps, one of the steps is asana, one of the steps is pranayama, etc. But taking this pranayama, asana, and these aspects itself as one of the major aspects, an entire new Shastra developed, which is called as the Hatha Yoga, which is an entire Shastra in itself, which has its seed in the Yoga Sutras and then it got developed later, which deals a lot with the pranayama, the asanas, and various other aspects, not just limited to these, many more aspects, which is what we will see. So Hatha Yoga is also an important Shastra. And we find the Yoga Taravali is entirely focused on the Hatha Yoga. It's a major work, it's a major part of the Yoga Taravali is focused on the Hatha Yoga. Now, when you look at Hatha Yoga, 3 of the most important texts or treatises that are considered for Hatha Yoga are the Geranda Samhita, the Shiva Samhita, and the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Now, these texts are considered to be the important texts of classical Hatha Yoga. But when you look at the dating of these texts, they all come maybe around the 14th, 15th to 17th century CE. Even when you go to the more earlier texts of Hatha Yoga, still probably you will trace them back to the 9th or 10th century. Even going by not getting into the details or not getting into the debate of the dating of the Acharya's birth or the Acharya's existence, even going by the most popular view of the 8th century, we still come to the conclusion that the Yoga Taravali is a much earlier composition or a much earlier work than the extant work on Hatha Yoga, which was composed either during the 9th or 10th century or the more classical Hatha Yoga texts which are composed in the later centuries. Hatha Yoga as a Shastra has been existing for a very long time, and Acharya itself makes reference to that. But if you look at those treatises, the major treatises of that Shastra, they have come much later. So Yoga Taravali becomes a very important work in that perspective, that it becomes one of the earliest works that we find on Hatha Yoga. Now in this, the reference that we get is that Acharya itself says in the Hatha Yoga, in the Yoga Taravali, when he makes a reference to the Kevala Kumbhaka, which is one of the pranayamas. It speaks about the different types of pranayamas, the different types of kumbhakas. And in that, he refers to one of the aspects of Kevala Kumbhaka. In that, he says, Sahasrashaha santu hateshu kumbhaha sambhavyate Kevala Kumbha eva. Sahasrashaha Santu Hateshu Kumbhaha. So the Hata Shastra, in the Hata, that space of Hata, there are several Kumbhakas. However, the Kevala Kumbha is the foremost among them, is the most superior among all those Kumbhas or Kumbhakas. So here we understand that yes, Acharya would have studied those Hata Shastras that were there in that time, and there he has become an adept and expert, and he is giving his opinion on the various aspects of the Hatha Yoga based on his detailed study. There are many other aspects that the Acharya refers to in the Yoga Taravali, right? You find a reference to the Nadhanusandhana. Actually, the Yoga Taravali, the initial few verses itself, Acharya makes reference to the Nadhanusandhana. The Laya, that is the dissolution of the mind and everything into Nada. Right? Nada being the source, and into that entire thing getting dissolved, the entire existence getting dissolved, or Laya. This is being spoken about in the 4th chapter of the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. In the final chapters is where Nadhanusandhana and Nada Laya, Laya into Nada, etc. is being spoken about. But here Acharya mentions about it in the very initial verses itself of the Yoga Taravali. And the beauty is that one of the verses that is we find in the Yoga Taravali, the construction of that verse is very, very nearly has been kept as it is in one of the verses in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. So we'll just see that one particular verse. Acharya says, Sada Shivoktani Sapada Laksha Layavadhanani Vasanti Loke Nadhanusandhana Samadhimekam Manyamahe Manyatamam Layanam. Sadashiva has spoken about 1,25,000 Layavadhanas. In what all way Layas can happen. However, Nadhanusandhana Samadhi, the Samadhi that is gained through Nadhanusandhana, through the meditation and concentration on Nada or sound, that primeval sound, Manyamahe, I consider, Acharya says, Manyatamam Layanam, among all the Layas, this is the foremost. The Hatha Yoga Pradipika says, Shri Adinathena Sapada Koti Laya Prakaraha Katita Jayanti Nadhanusandhanam Anekameva Manyamahe Mukhyatamam Layana. Nadhanusandhanakamekam Manyamahe Mukhyatamam Layana. So there he says Nadhanusandhana Samadhimekam Manyamahe Manyatamam Layana. And Hatha Yoga Pradipika says Nadhanusandhanakam ekameva Manyamahe Mukhyatamam Layana. So we find that even the construction, the way it is being spoken about, is more or less being detailed even in the later texts. He goes on to explain about the 3 most important bandhas, the Udyana Bandha, the Mula Bandha, and the Jalandhara Bandha, and the importance of performing all these bandhas together, and how that can be a powerful tool, an instrument to defy age, disease, debility, all of the problems of human existence can be defied by these through bandhakas itself, by these bandhanas itself. And all this powerful bandhas are very clearly explained even in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. Then of course he speaks about various avasthas like the Manonmani avastha. He speaks about the Kevala Kumbhaka which we saw. He speaks about Raja Yoga. And all of this find detailed explanations in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. So though it is a verse of only around 28-29 verses, the Yoga Taravali, it draws the essence of Hatha Yoga and presents those. That is how Acharya has coined the whole thing, just presenting the essence of what is required. It is not a detailed treatise speaking, or giving all the details of how this and that is to be done. But he's picking up all the gems and stringing it together into a garland, which is called as Yoga Taravali. That is why it is called as Yoga Taravali itself, right? Now, this is a reference that we find in the works of the Acharya. So we saw till now the various references, the quotations that we find in the works of the Acharya, which stand testimony to the fact that the Acharya is an adept in these Shastras, has practiced these Shastras. That is why he is able to give those references. That is why he is able to make his own suggestions and recommendations and opinions on these various aspects, not just on the Yoga Sutra, which is very closely allied with Vedanta Shastra, but also on the Hatha Yoga, which Acharya has clearly commented upon. Now, when you come to the practice of yoga, now the question becomes, how do we know if Acharya was a practitioner of the yoga, and how do we come to know? We have to rely on the biographies of the Acharya, right? So in the biographies of the Acharya, the Shankara Vijayas, the Shankara Charitras, everything will we see. Of course, one of the foremost references or the foremost sources, evidences that we get is the Madhaviya Shankara Vijaya, which is considered as one of the most authentic Shankara Vijayas, which documents a biography of the Acharya. In that, in the Madhaviya Shankara Vijaya, there is an instance, there is an episode mentioned at Srisailam, right? When Acharya is staying at Srisailam, there is a Kapalika. We know the story, where a Kapalika comes, because Srisailam was a vibrant place of various aspects of Shaivism and Shaktism. Because it is a Shakti Pitha, goddess Brahmarambika is present there. It is a very popular and very powerful Shakti Pitha. It is one of the Jyotirlingas. Mallikarjuna Swami, Sri Shaile Mallikarjunam. It is one of the Dwadasha Jyotirlingas, since it is one of the foremost Shiva Pithas as well. So it is the foremost Shiva Shakti Pitha. And at various points of time, especially in the olden times, even till today, the Shakta and Shaiva traditions are still being followed in various parts of that region. In the olden days, it was even higher, especially during the times of the Acharya. So various aspects of Shaivism, be it the Pashupata, Kapalika, Maheshwara, all of this, or be it the various aspects of Shaktism, the harmless and the harmful aspects, right? All of these, the more Rajasic, the more Tamasic, and the Sattvic, various aspects of these traditions were being followed. So the Kapalika tradition was also very, very, very popular. And they had the Bhairava, Kala Bhairava, Ugra Bhairava, various forms of Bhairava as the deities whom they worshipped, and they did Upasana of. So with the Acharyas, Vedanta Dindima, and going around and spreading the message of Advaita Vedanta and all these traditions becoming obsolete, that spread this fear that even the traditions of Kapalika and everything will become obsolete with the Acharya coming, and they had to defend this tradition. So that is where you find a Kapalika who approaches the Acharya in the form of a great devotee or a disciple or a sadhu. He stays with the Acharya for some time, and finally he makes a very, very strange request to the Acharya. When nobody is around, he makes a request to the Acharya that his Ishta Devata is Bhairava, Ugra Bhairava. And to that Ugra Bhairava, the typical offering that is given is Narabali, right? Is the sacrifice of a human being. And that too a Brahmajnani, self-realized soul. His head is the most auspicious offering to give as per their Shastras. So he knows and he believes, he has firm faith that the Acharya is a great Brahmajnani, and his head, if offered to Ugra Bhairava, would be most auspicious as per their tradition, and he would like to do that. So he requests the Acharya that he can behead the Acharya, or Acharya offer his head to the Kapalika. What a strange request. But Acharya, being the Brahmajnani, being steeped in Advaita Vedanta, how does it matter whether the body is there or not there? So he agrees, but he says, you cannot do it when everybody is around, because my disciples and my Shishaganas are there with me. They are not going to allow you to do this. So when everybody has slept off, and on the appointed day and appointed time when you have to do the offering, the Narabali, come in the night when everybody has slept off. I will be awake. I will be there waiting for you. You can take me along. As suggested, all this happens. He takes Acharya to the place of Narabali. Acharya sees all the settings. He understands the situation, and he goes into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. Now, many of the Charitras, they just mentioned that Acharya went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. But the Madhaviya Shankara Vijayam, it explains how Acharya went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. It says, Acharya uttered the syllable Om, he uttered the Pranava. He withdrew the senses into the mind and the mind into the self and went into Nirvikalpa Samadhi. His posture in Samadhi, he was having a steady neck, a steady backbone, the palms lying supine on the knees, with a calm face and countenance, with half open eyes, ardhanimilita, half open eyes, fixed on the tip of the nose, the nasagra. This much description the Madhaviya Shankara Vijaya gives. Now, when you compare this kind of description with the kind of avasthas, especially the Manonmani avastha, you find a lot of resemblance. Because it is about laya. It is Manonmani. The entire manas is dissolved into that self. That is what happens here. And Acharya gets into the Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And Acharya mentions about this in the Yoga Taravali as well, that for the great souls, Manonmani Avastha and Nirvikalpa Samadhi will come in a jiffy. It doesn't take time for them at all. They are so experts and adept in Yoga Shastra, they are so steeped in that whenever they want, that Avastha will come to them in a moment, in a kshana. That is what we find, that Acharya utters the pranava and he goes into the Nirvikalpa Samadhi. And then in a way to favor the Kapalika, to say, now you can behead me because I'm not going to feel any pain, because I'm dissolved in the self, and the body is, I have no relationship with the body anymore, isn't it? So this seems to be like the Manonmani Avastha, the laya attained through nada, the nada anusandhana that the Hatha Yoga Pradipika mentions. So what does the Hatha Yoga Pradipika say? Unmani avapyate, unmani, the state of unmani, which is called here Manonmani. Unmani avapyate shighram. It comes very fast. Brudhyanam mama sammatam. Brudhyanam, at the center of the eyebrows, right? That brudhyanam mama sammatam. Raja Yoga padam praptum. Sukhopayolpa chetasam. Even the dull witched can achieve this. It is very, very simple. The Raja Yoga pada can be achieved very fast by anybody. It doesn't need an expert also. Anybody can achieve it. Sadhyaha pratyaya sandhayi jayate nadajo layaha. This is the nadaja laya. Telling the pranavanada and getting into laya. In the Yoga Taravali, there is another aspect that Acharya says. He speaks about a particular avastha where he says, Nishwasa lopaihi nibhrutaihi shariraihi netrambujaihi ardhanimilitaischa avirbhavanti amanaska mudram alokayamo munipungavanam. Avirbhavanti amanaska mudra. This is called amanaska mudra, the no manas. The mudra without the manas. The amanaska mudra alokayamaha. Munipungavanam, the greatest of the munis enter into this. How is the sharira? How is the state of such munis? Nishwasa lopaihi nibhrutaihi shariraihi. Straightforward. Nishwasa, the breathing is stopped. Steady body. Netrambujaihi ardhanimilitaischa. So you find such beautiful references in the Yoga Taravali and the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and when you make a comparison, you find that this is the avastha that Acharya entered into, which could be referred as the Manonmani avastha, it could be the Amanaska Mudra, all of this combined, and the Nadha Anusandhana Layam, the dissolution that is happening by the uttering of the Nada or the Pranava. So this is one big reference, one of the few references that we find in the Madhaviya Shankara Vijaya and generally in the Shankara Vijaya that speaks about the Yoga Avastha, that Acharya was himself an adept yogi. There are various other instances which could have only been possible because of yoga, be it the travel of the Acharya to his mother's place in a jiffy, because he takes along with him Chitsuka. Chitsuka travels with Acharya, but Chitsuka, somehow in his head, he finds that we have reached quite fast. It is in Sringeri, right? From Sringeri to Kalati, he travels. Whereas Sureshwara and other Shishyaganas, they started the very next day after the Acharya and Chitsuka started from Sringeri. They reach many, many days later to Kalati. After the Antya Samskara of the mother is done, after a few days only they reach. Whereas Acharya reaches In the last moments of his mother, the Antya Samskara and everything is done, and after a few days, these people reach. So it is again the power of yoga. It is a siddhi that the Acharya has attained through the yoga, making it possible of his travel through air, travel invisibly, travel defying time. That we find the same aspect of the Acharya, which is about the yoga. Then again, the other instant is of Damaruka, of the entering into the body of King Amaruka. Again, Parakaya Pravesha is another siddhi. All these siddhis also are mentioned in the Yoga Sutra, saying that these are various at various milestones or aspects of the yoga siddhi, or the maturity or the success in the Ashtanga yoga. These siddhis come to the yogis. The yogis become adept, or they become advanced in these siddhis. These siddhis come to them. They can use these siddhis. They become successful in using these siddhis. But the ultimate objective is to go beyond these siddhis and attain the self. So it's very clear from these various instances that we find in the life history of the Acharya also that Acharya was a great yogi par excellence, an adept in the Yoga Shastra. And to prove that is why we find these various granthas also, where Acharya has quoted, Acharya has referenced, Acharya has composed aspects on Yoga Shastra. And interestingly, the Yoga Taravali, this entire episode that I mentioned about the Kapalika, Yoga Taravali actually mentions about Srisailam. Very rarely does Acharya mention the name of the temple or the place in the composition in his works, right? Unless and until he's composing the work on a particular deity, he will speak about the deity and the temple in general. But in other stotras which are related to Advaita Vedanta or yoga and other things, Acharya will not make reference to all the theistic aspects or the temples and the deity and everything. But here, he specifically mentions in the Yoga Taravali towards the end, Siddhim Thata Vidha Mano Vilayam Samadhau Srishaila Shringa Kuhareshu Kadopalapsye. When will I be able to sit in one of the guhas, one of the caves of Srishaila Shringa, the peaks of Srishaila, and just lose myself in samadhi? Because the place is so adept, so powerful, so vibrant for the yogis and the siddhas, that they can get into that state in a jiffy, into the nirvikalpa samadhi in a jiffy. So it is very interesting that this also bears a lot of connection, that the entire aspect of the Kapalika mentioned in the Shankara Vijayas happens in Srishaila, and this is the place where Sri Acharya seems to have stayed for quite some time and composed the Yoga Taravali. We also find reference to the Srisailam in Shivananda Lahari, which also gives reference to the fact that probably these two compositions were done by the Acharya at Srisailam itself, both the Yoga Taravali and the Shivananda Lahari. So this also gives a very interesting correlation between the various aspects of the Acharya. So these were some of the aspects that I wanted to share with all of you during this session. I hope all of you enjoyed this and could get some information out of this. Namaskara.